We are looking at a pretty intense scenario today. We are trying to define the architecture of global risk in the year 2026.
Right, guided by those recent, pretty sobering analyses from the Eurasia Group and the Stimson Center.
Exactly. And the central question is really about who holds the ultimate power to cause a global catastrophe. I mean, based on those findings, my position is that official heads of state, the major military and economic powers, remain fundamentally the most dangerous figures on the planet.
Well, I approach this from a completely different angle. I think focusing on heads of state relies on this sort of outdated metric. We are confusing public visibility with ultimate power.
You do not think the visibility matters?
I think the truly dangerous figures in 2026 are the unelected, non-official architects of the global system. I mean, we're talking about technology billionaires, finance titans, and intelligence chiefs.
Interesting.
Yeah, because these individuals control the critical infrastructure. They dictate what those official states are actually capable of doing.
Let me ground the state-centric argument in the raw reality of the present moment, though. Geopolitical danger right now is defined by this incredibly volatile combination of nuclear capability and regional conflict.
Sure.
I mean, the Eurasia Group specifically points to the transformation of the United States system under Donald Trump as a massive global risk.
Right, alongside Vladimir Putin's strategy of prolonged confrontation.
Exactly. Putin is backed by a massive nuclear arsenal, and Xi Jinping has immense military and economic weight regarding Taiwan. We are basically looking at what the Stimson Center calls the third nuclear age.
Which is a crucial distinction for our listeners.
It really is. I mean, the first nuclear age was the bilateral Cold War standoff, right? The second was the post-Cold War era of rogue state proliferation.
But this third nuclear age is a multipolar scramble.
Precisely. The traditional guardrails have basically vanished. Multiple state actors possess tactical weapons without clear red lines. So in this environment, the true metric of danger is the literal button.
The button, right?
Yes, the raw state-sanctioned ability to provoke a massive global economic shock or initiate a nuclear exchange through a single sovereign decision. Only a recognized head of state has that apparatus.
Well, I accept your definition of the third nuclear age, but evaluating danger through the lens of institutional military command completely ignores how modern leverage actually functions mechanically.
How so?
Because danger in 2026 stems from unchecked control over systemic architecture. Consider someone like Elon Musk.
Okay, controlling SpaceX and Starlink.
Right, and XAI and X. He controls the very satellite communications that modern militaries rely upon. A unilateral decision by a technology oligarch requires absolutely no congressional approval.
That is true.
It faces no friction from diplomatic treaties either. These figures can generate immediate, devastating military effects worldwide simply by altering an algorithm or restricting access to a network. Look at Sam Altman steering advanced AI. The capability there is staggering.
I hear you on the immense influence of tech executives, but let me give you a different perspective using a specific analogy.
Go ahead.
A technology CEO might own the chessboard. They might carve the wooden pieces, polish the squares, and set the rules for how the pieces slide across the board.
Okay, I follow.
But a nuclear state leader like Kim Jong-un, or say Narendra Modi, when we look at the India and Pakistan nuclear dynamic, possesses the power to simply incinerate the entire board.
I see where you are going, but
State leaders wield hard, inescapable physical power. The unpredictability of a state actor possessing ballistic missiles transcends digital architecture.
I reject that analogy completely.
You do not think incinerating the board ends the game?
The technology leaders and infrastructure owners are not merely carving the wooden pieces. They are actively dictating whether those pieces can move at all. You mentioned the physical reality of a ballistic missile.
Right.
Let us look at how modern military targeting actually works. A modern defense system does not operate in an analog vacuum.
Well, obviously it uses computers, but
Processing satellite imagery, coordinating intercepts, managing logistics, all of that requires massive off-site computational power. Look at Jensen Huang.
the CEO of Nvidia?
Exactly. AI chips are now critical geopolitical assets. If you control semiconductor access or commercial cloud infrastructure, like Jeff Bezos with Amazon Web Services, you control the state's ability to even launch its weapons or run its economy.
I mean, that implies a state would let a private company stop them.
The button you reference does not operate by magic. It is essentially an API call to a highly networked, privately maintained digital nervous system. If the architects of those networks sever the connection, the head of state is left pushing a dead switch.
Wait, are you seriously suggesting a commercial entity would or could disconnect a sovereign military?
They have the technical capability to do so, yes.
Let us assume a cloud provider or a semiconductor manufacturer decides to alter their terms of service to block a military operation. A sovereign state holds the monopoly on legitimate violence.
Sure, legally.
If a technology company becomes genuinely threatening to the national interest, the head of state possesses the constitutional authority to nationalize their assets. They can seize the servers and they can arrest the executive board.
But seizing a server farm does not mean you capture the capability to run it. You are basically just capturing a black box.
The state has its own engineers, though.
Not at that level. Modern artificial intelligence models and distributed satellite networks require constant proprietary maintenance by highly specialized engineering teams. A state cannot simply point a gun at a server and expect it to process complex targeting algorithms.
I mean, they can compel cooperation.
The state is structurally dependent on the private sector. The physical destruction you describe requires an operational digital pipeline to execute.
That brings up a fascinating tension between physical force and digital reliance. But let us look at the nature of the decisions being made.
Okay.
Even the most aggressive geopolitical actors operate within known strategic frameworks. Consider leaders like Benjamin Netanyahu or Ali Khamenei in Iran.
Right.
Or Ahmad Vahidi. When these figures take extreme actions, they operate within the context of historical precedents. We know their established alliances, and we understand the game theory.
You think they are predictable?
Their actions trigger predictable chain reactions. We understand the diplomatic mechanisms, the red lines, and the treaty obligations. There is a legible geometry to state-to-state conflict.
I actually think that predictability is exactly why they are not the most dangerous figures.
Why?
Known variables are still dangerous.
Because known variables can be managed. The non-state actors operate in a shadow realm that entirely lacks democratic accountability or predictable treaty constraints.
Give me an example outside of tech, then.
Let us step away from technology and look at the financial sector. Take a massive capital manager like Larry Fink at BlackRock or David Solomon. High finance at that level has the capacity to influence entire sovereign states without ever deploying a single soldier.
Wait, just so we are completely clear on the mechanism here, are you saying a bond market shift is equivalent to a military invasion?
In terms of systemic disruption, absolutely.
Because one involves financial loss and the other involves kinetic destruction. Those are very different things. I am saying the financial shift can hollow out a country's ability to defend itself before the invasion even happens.
How so?
Look at how sovereign debt operates. If massive asset managers dictate capital flight from a specific nation, that country's currency collapses. Inflation skyrockets. The government can no longer afford to pay its military or import food.
So the state falls into chaos.
Exactly. Financial giants can silently destabilize a nation's economy through capital allocation alone.
I see the economic danger, but
Furthermore, look at the modern merger of private force and surveillance technology. Look at the historical model of Yevgeny Prigozhin or Alex Karp today.
the CEO of Palantir.
Right. Companies like Palantir represent a model where private entities control the surveillance algorithms and the logistical software that the military uses to understand the battlefield. The state becomes a mere client.
I concede that economic hollowing is a devastating weapon, but I keep coming back to one fundamental truth regarding accountability.
Which is what?
If BlackRock or a defense contractor acts against the interests of the state, they're subject to the laws written by the head of state.
Assuming the state catches them in time.
You mentioned that public institutions cannot regulate what they do not understand, but history shows us that states consistently assert their power over oligarchs when push comes to shove.
I disagree that it is that simple.
I mean, the invisible architects only wield power precisely because the official state allows them to do so within a permitted legal framework. If you are so powerful, aren't you still ultimately subordinate to the heads of state who appoint or regulate you? Doesn't the buck still stop with the visible leader?
That assumes the state actually knows what is going on in the first place. You are assuming the president or the prime minister has a perfect, unfiltered view of reality.
They have intelligence agencies.
Exactly, which brings us to the most critical layer of the invisible architecture, the intelligence vanguard.
Okay, let us talk about them.
Aggregated intelligence is worth vastly more than a standing army. Knowing before the others changes everything. Consider figures directing national intelligence, like Sergei Naryshkin in Russia.
The head of Russian foreign intelligence.
Right. Or William J. Burns, or Avril Haines in the U.S. These individuals define the reality that the visible leaders act upon.
Let us unpack that. You are arguing that because intelligence directors provide the information, they are the ones truly in charge.
Exactly. Think of it like a GPS algorithm in a vehicle.
Okay.
The driver of the car represents the head of state, and the engine represents the military. It does not matter how powerful the engine is, or how aggressive the driver is.
Right.
Because they rely on the map.
Yes.
If the GPS is programmed by the intelligence chief to route the car into a lake, the car goes into the lake. The intelligence director controls the map.
That is a fascinating way to frame it.
If an intelligence chief curates a briefing that indicates an imminent existential threat, the head of state's options are immediately restricted by that curated information. By the time a head of state makes a decision, the menu of options has already been meticulously constructed.
By the systemic architects.
Precisely. The state cannot regulate or arrest a threat it does not perceive, and its perception is entirely controlled by these highly insulated figures.
Well, the GPS analogy is brilliant, but I would argue it describes the mechanics of implementation rather than the origin of sovereign intent.
How do you separate intent from information, though?
Because the intelligence chief provides the map and perhaps curates the menu of options, but the appetite and the final selection remain the exclusive domain of the head of state.
I am not so sure about that.
Let us look at the raw exercise of sovereign will. When a leader decides to cross a recognized international border or initiate a sweeping domestic mobilization, we are witnessing deeply psychological and historical forces at play.
Sure, psychology matters.
The power to inspire a population, to declare war, to sign a binding peace treaty, these require a centralized, visible authority.
They do.
A cloud infrastructure executive or an intelligence director simply cannot rally a nation to absorb the massive casualties and economic shocks of a prolonged conflict. The visible face of the state remains the supreme rallying point for geopolitical momentum.
I completely acknowledge the psychological weight of the sovereign leader. The ability to mobilize public opinion is a real, tangible variable.
So you agree the visible leader is essential?
Essential for public relations, yes, but we must look at the structural hierarchy of modern power that underpins those diplomatic declarations.
What hierarchy is that?
The true rule of global influence follows a very strict, sequential hierarchy. It goes like this: information, energy, finance, semiconductors, armaments, and only then psychological influence and narrative control.
Wait, let me stop you there. You placed information and energy at the very top.
I did.
Above armaments. Are you arguing that a country with a massive, sophisticated military is fundamentally subordinate to a country or an entity that controls the energy supply chains and the data centers?
Unquestionably. An F-35 fighter jet is the pinnacle of modern armaments, right?
Yes, obviously.
But it is essentially an incredibly complex data node. It requires constant software updates, specialized supply chains for its physical components, and massive amounts of jet fuel.
Okay, I see your point.
If you control the microchips inside its targeting computer or the financial systems that process the purchase of its fuel, you control the jet. You do not need to shoot the jet out of the sky if you can ground it through supply chain manipulation or software denial.
So the invisible infrastructure dictates the capacity for kinetic action?
Exactly. When a sovereign leader makes that grand declaration of war to rally the populace, it is the logistical, financial, and technological architects who determine whether that war can actually be fought, sustained, or won.
This is where the tension becomes so fascinating for me. I see how deeply integrated the private infrastructure is with the state apparatus.
It is inseparable now.
However, I maintain that when the system breaks down, when diplomacy fails and the global order fractures, The ultimate burden of final catastrophic action rests with the sovereign.
Even if they do not own the pipes.
Even then, the Eurasia Group's focus on major military powers highlights a reality we simply cannot ignore. Infrastructure and finance are tools of influence, but a nuclear warhead is a tool of finality.
I mean, we are back to the button.
We are. Because a tech executive can manipulate a market, but they cannot legally order the destruction of a city. The individuals with their fingers poised over those specific state-sanctioned buttons carry a level of acute danger that cannot be matched by private sector leverage.
I understand the gravity of that.
Their visibility does not diminish their capacity for initiating sudden, irreversible global trauma.
And my counter to that remains consistent. The button itself is a component of a much larger, invisible machine. You view the button as the origin of action.
I do.
I view the button as the final, almost mechanical output of a system designed, maintained, and heavily influenced by the architects of our financial, technological, and intelligence networks.
So they are basically just pulling the lever someone else built.
Exactly. The capacity to act is entirely dependent on the infrastructure of action. The true architects shape the world through algorithms, capital allocation, and classified intelligence flows, entirely insulated from public accountability.
Well, we have unpacked an incredibly complex framework today, and I believe we have actually arrived at a vital point of convergence.
I think so too.
While we disagree on exactly who sits at the absolute apex of global danger, we both clearly recognize that the definition of power in 2026 has irrevocably expanded.
Completely. The criteria for geopolitical risk goes far beyond simple troop counts and territorial boundaries now.
Exactly. It now fundamentally includes who controls the information pipelines, the energy grids, the semiconductor supply chains, and the underlying data that feeds the decision makers.
The entire hidden ecosystem.
Right. As we wrap up this discussion, I want to return to that image of the chessboard we debated earlier.
I still say the tech guys own the board.
Well, whether the ultimate trigger is pulled by a highly visible president violently overturning the board, or by an invisible architect who decides to quietly dismantle the board from underneath, the complexity of our modern era requires us to look far beyond the traditional headlines.
Absolutely.
Understanding where true geopolitical risk originates means we really have to examine both the fist that strikes and the digital nervous system that commands it.
Precisely. We must continually map that nervous system if we have any hope of understanding the reality of modern power. Thank you to all our listeners for tuning in to Les Podcasts de Philippe. Please help us reach our goal of 2,000 subscribers by subscribing today and make sure to share our podcast with your network.